Thank you, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I think many people are familiar with the basic details of the Kate Steinle case in San Francisco, where a man who had racked up 7 felony convictions, had actually been deported from the United States 5 times before, was finishing his sentence in federal prison for that crime of reentry after deportation. The feds turned him over to San Francisco because San Francisco asked for him. There was an active warrant. They asked for him to be transferred to them so that they could prosecute him on a drug case, which they then dismissed the very next day. There was ICE, before turning him over, issued a detainer and said that we want this individual back because we intend to reinstate his prior order of removal to send him back to his home country. That detainer was ignored by policy. This was not a mistake. This was a policy that the San Francisco sheriff had to reject all ICE detainers. 4 months later, he murdered Kate Steinle and has admitted to that. ICE was doing its job in this instance. It may not have been the intent of San Francisco's sanctuary policy to allow people like this to go back to the streets, people like Sanchez, but this was a predictable result of having such a policy, that this could happen. Most people in law enforcement knew it was a likelihood. That's why most of the California sheriffs lobbied very vigorously in opposition to a state law that was passed by the California legislature to limit their cooperation. It was not an aberration. This report that I had obtained from ICE in a FOIA request, which is linked to, we have a copy of my FOIA response, which is linked in my report, so anyone can read it and view it. ICE had been tracking these cases of local sanctuary jurisdictions rejecting their detainers and blocking cooperation. What ICE found is that as of October 2014, there were 276 jurisdictions that they had identified within the country who had these policies. And in that time period of January 1st, 2014 to August 31st, 2014, there were more than 8,100 individuals that ICE was seeking to deport who were released as a result of local sanctuary policies. And again, they knew what the consequence. ICE knows very well what the consequences can be when these detainers are ignored. In 2014, in Romeoville, Illinois, a man who had been released by Cook County, which also has one of the more extreme sanctuary policies, he did a 60-day stint in Cook County jail for a domestic assault offense. Cook County ignored the ICE detainer, and not long after, he killed a 15-year-old girl named Brianna Valley and shot her mother in their driveway. In 2011, something similar had happened in Albion, New York. A man who had been released out of bonding out for a burglary charge, ICE issued a detainer. It was ignored by the local jurisdiction. They released him back onto the streets. Soon after, stabbed and killed a 45-year-old woman named Kathleen Byam, who was shopping at Walmart that day. So it's not as if this was someone trying to dream up what the worst case scenario theoretically might be. This has happened. 2/3 of the individuals out of the 8,100 who had been the subject of detainers, 2/3 of them already, actually 63% to be exact, already had a serious criminal history at the time that they were released by the sanctuary jurisdiction when ICE had issued a detainer for them. 1,900 of them subsequently were rearrested for yet a new crime after their release by the local authorities. Within just an 8-month period of this report, already about 1/4 of them had reoffended. What we don't know is, because of the way ICE answered my request for the information, we don't know exactly which of those 1,900 who committed another preventable crime, what their prior criminal history was. But we do know that 1,900 of them have committed another crime. Only 28% of the total number of people who were released by the sanctuary jurisdictions have since been taken back into custody by ICE. It's not that easy for them to just go out and rearrest someone that they know has been released in one of these places. In fact, even only 39% of the criminal recidivists, the 1,900 who've already committed other crimes, only 39% of those have been rearrested by ICE. And this report, which again you can view, has 6 specific examples of things that have happened after release, crimes that have been committed. There was a child molester who went on to commit other sexual offenses against children. In San Francisco, there was somebody who had robbery and narcotics possession charges, who then committed a violent rape. In Santa Clara, somebody who had theft and stolen property charges went on to resist arrest, causing death or severe bodily injury to a law enforcement officer. So it's not possible to predict what can happen, but the one thing that is common in all of these cases is that ICE was seeking to deport them, and the local jurisdiction rejected that request. So where are these sanctuary cities? We've prepared a map, which is now on our website, where you can see all of the 276 jurisdictions that have been named by ICE as not cooperative. And there's information on exactly what policy they have adopted that caused them to be on ICE's list. And again, we were simply re-reporting ICE's list. This was not based on any subjective judgments we made. This is what they've experienced. The highest numbers are in Southern California in terms of the numbers of detainers that have been rejected. The 5 top sanctuary jurisdictions are Santa Clara County, which includes San Jose, California, Los Angeles County, Alameda County, San Diego County, and Miami-Dade County in Florida. In all 276 jurisdictions, there are some limitations on cooperation and some level of obstruction of what ICE is trying to do. Why do they do this? I mean, no rational person would want to, you would think, would want to release people that are likely to go on to commit other crimes. But I think it's important to understand that most of these sanctuary policies do not originate with the law enforcement agency. This is not mainstream law enforcement practice in any way, shape, or form. They're usually imposed by elected officials in these places. In many cases, it's because they have been told by advocacy groups that if they cooperate with the federal government on immigration enforcement, that immigrants in their communities will lose trust in law enforcement and be afraid to report crimes. This is nonsense, absolute nonsense. It is just an excuse for having a sanctuary policy for political reasons. There is absolutely no evidence in government data, law enforcement data, even academic research on this question that supports this notion of what they call a chilling effect on crime reporting. I've studied this for years, read all the literature on it. There have been a number of studies. Not only is there no evidence that this happens, there are a number of studies that refute it, including one good study done by the University of Virginia on Prince William County, Virginia. There are individual law enforcement agencies that have studied their crime reporting data and found the same thing, that there is no chilling effect or reduction in crime reporting that happens in places that cooperate with ICE. I've looked at the data in Boston and Los Angeles. Oh, and Mark is reminding me, the data I've summarized in a fact sheet that I put together recently, which is also in your packet, called Immigration Enforcement and Community Policing. There simply is no decline in crime reporting that happens as a result of cooperation. Victims and witnesses are not targets for immigration enforcement. There may be problems with this perception now, but blocking the enforcement of federal laws is not going to help overcome any problems of trust. There are much better ways to do it that have been successfully adopted in many law enforcement agencies across the country. The solution here really, ideally, would be for state and local jurisdictions to end their sanctuary policies. That's not going to happen on its own. In fact, yesterday, DHS Secretary Jay Johnson testified before the House Judiciary Committee. He's going around trying to persuade some of these sanctuary jurisdictions to end their sanctuary status and cooperate through this new watered-down enforcement program they have called the Priority Enforcement Program, which I think some of the other panelists are going to address more directly. Already there are 5 out of the top 50 jurisdictions in the country that are saying, no, we're not doing that. So obviously, these jurisdictions aren't going to do it on their own. The federal government, we know, is not going to sue them, even though they would have grounds to do so, many of us believe. So it's up to Congress, really, to take the initiative and address this problem by, first of all, clarifying in federal law that the expectation is that local jurisdictions may not obstruct, must cooperate with ICE when it is seeking the deportation of someone, or there will be sanctions, such as Mr. Barletta has proposed, to cut off funding to those jurisdictions that are not compliant. Money talks. You're absolutely right. I agree 100%. So this is something really that falls squarely on Congress to address, and we'll have to wait and see what happens, but that's the most likely solution to this problem.